happiness is you. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do. Hey, go. Bring me down. Can't none bring me down. Your love is too high. Bring me down. Can't none bring me down. I said, bring me down. Can't none bring me down. Your love is too high. Bring me down. Can't none bring me down. I said, clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do. Clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do. Bring me down, can't none bring me down. Your love is too high, bring me down, can't none bring me down.
Good afternoon, honorees. I hope everybody can see me and hear me okay. My name is Lee Williamson. I am the editor of Generation T, and that was Pharrell Williams playing us in with Happy, which was released in the halcyon days of 2013, a time when Corona was a weak beer and Trump was a reality TV star. They feel like much simpler times now in 2020, on the other hand. It's not as easy to stay happy and well in the current climate. We're living through extraordinary times right now, a period of stress and anxiety that's unprecedented in most of our lifetimes. It's a time when workforce wellness is more often than not likely to get cut in a financial climate like today. But genuinely, this is a mistake. Our speaker today is going to tell us why, before laying out some strategies that can be immediately actioned to improve morale and productivity in your team. So let's take a quick look at the agenda. Okay, moving over. So our speaker, Megan Lamb, will lead our workshop for around 30 minutes. After that, we'll have a Q&A session for around 10 minutes before we wrap up at about 5:45. So without further ado, let me introduce the driver of today's session. So Megan Lamb is the co-founder and CEO of Neurum. Neurum is a Hong Kong-based digital health company that provides personalized mental health and wellness support at scale. Megan has a background in neuroscience and psychiatry and has spoken widely about the intersection of tech and mental health. She built and led a team at the Yale School of Medicine, which focused on how data from our phones can tell us more about patterns in mental health. She also delivered a fantastic TED Talk on that subject. I really recommend you all check it out after watching this Cloud Talk, of course, and has consulted for the German government's International Development Program on digital health. So finally, just a couple of housekeeping things about today's session. This is a private event for Gen.T honorees. We are recording this session. Please do feel free to use the chat box for any questions or comment or get to know one another. We can't emphasize enough, we love a lively chat box, so please do feel free to connect with one another, get to know each other, and really make use of that chat box. There'll also be a number of polls which will come your way. Please do get involved with those as well. It really helps us kind of get the feedback from you in real time. Other than that, everyone watching this today will be on mute and view only mode, apart from the Q&A session. So the Q&A session will literally ask you to ask your question on the mic. So if you have a question for Megan at the end, then use the raise hand function on Zoom, which you can probably see at the bottom of the Zoom window there among your options. Click raise hand if you have a question, and then I'll be moderating the Q&A. I'll call upon you. Unmute your mic, and then please do introduce yourself before asking your question. Please tag at Generation T _Asia and use Generation T Asia on social. So with that, let's begin. I'm delighted to introduce Megan Lamb. Megan, are you there?
Hi, Lee. How's it going? Hi, everyone.
Hi, I'm well, thank you. A couple of little technical glitches over this side, but it wouldn't be a webinar without them. So really excited to see what you have for us. So without much more fanfare and faffing around from me, I'm going to hand over into your safe hands and let you share your screen.
Will do. Let's see if this
Thank you, Megan.
works out. How is that?
Yep, can see it beautifully.
Wonderful. Great. So thank you so much, Lee, for the intro. And it's a pleasure to be sharing a bit more on how to build mental wellness at work today. And Lee, as you mentioned, a lot of conversations around health and wellness today are so laced with COVID-19, right? And that's understandable given the increased levels of stress and anxiety from, changes in our working arrangements and, just the fear of uncertainty of this pandemic. However, that being said, workforce mental health and wellness was already on people's radars and growing in awareness, and rightfully so, as I'll soon share. Just very quickly, just going to share a little bit about Neurum and what we do. So we're a B2B digital behavioral health company, and we built an app companion called Clara that does risk screening and personalized support for individuals in organizations. And we essentially want to make, mental health initiatives and seeking support as seamless and as easy for you and your people as well. And we are currently in Hong Kong, China, Singapore, and Vietnam. And if you'd be keen on learning about where your company is in terms of mental health and wellness, and sort of giving your people support that works and works around the clock, I'm very happy to chat more offline. So very quickly, this is just sort of 3 things that I wanted to hit today. I'm going to start with a rapid fire game of Mythbusters. And Zoom won't let me do this with the webinar function, but I wish I could hear the responses. So I'm just going to say a true false statement. You can just sort of answer that in your mind. And I'll just go through those one by one. Then we'll swiftly move to the anatomy of mental wellness at work, and sort of dissect and understand the core elements of what we should be looking at and what does that mental wellness at work look like. Then we'll end on something a little more actionable on, okay, great, Meg, we just covered all of that. What do I do now? So this is our very first statement, right? You can just sort of think about this and answer true or false in your mind. The first statement is 12% of employees still go into work even when they're experiencing mental ill health. And that is false. The real number is actually closer to around 64% of employees that go into work knowing that their productivity will be impacted due to mental health issues. And this is usually a larger portion of the workforce than employers might immediately think. And this is primarily because, there's still a great level of stigma that deters people from talking about it openly. But also because employees also don't have a strong awareness in their own state of mental health and the vocabulary to talk about it as much now as well. The second statement is experiencing poor mental health means feeling low and sad. And this is false. It is a common misconception that mental health is all about feelings. or all about, feeling low, negative moods. It's all about stress. But what really gets sort of left out of the conversation oftentimes is the issue of functionality. When you reach that threshold of when you're no longer able to function as well as you used to. And according to the World Health Organization, so this is more of their definition of it, it's a state of well-being in which individuals realize their own abilities, they can cope with normal stressors in life, they can work productively and fruitfully, and they can make significant and meaningful contributions to their communities, such as their workplace, for example. So what we sort of know as engagement or productivity and creative problem solving, etc., research has shown that they can be almost seen as tertiary outcomes of how our mental health and wellness is. And I believe that there was a poll that just went out asking, does your company have a plan in place to improve employee mental wellness? And I'm really glad to see a couple of yeses in there, and some no's, but mostly saying not yet, but we're already working on it. So this is very positive news to even just be doing this webinar, and that you're on here learning more about what we can potentially do, and you already have like an action-oriented mindset towards this. The next one is mental health issues cost the global economy $1 trillion per year in lost productivity. And that is true. So there's this new research that came out recently on mental health, and it from the Lancet Commission, which is an academic journal. And essentially it said that mental health issues are basically on the rise in every single country, and it doesn't discriminate, and will cost the global economy, if we keep going this way, $16 trillion by 2030. These are mostly due to mental illness arising in people's lives and lost productivity. And so they made an estimate in that paper that about 12 billion working days are lost due to this every year if we keep going. So just to give you a bit of perspective on how large this is. The next one is, I can fire or decide not to hire talent if they have a mental health issue. And I really hope that there is a resounding false to this. First of all, because it's a human right violation, please don't do that. But honestly, it's also doing your business a disservice as well with that level of lack of diversity and inclusion. I'll touch a bit more about this a little further along in the webinar. The next one is 1 in 20 employees struggle with mental health issues at any given point. This is false. The number, and I'm going to use numbers closer to Hong Kong's workforce, which is where we're currently at the moment, which is 1 in 3. So it is a lot more. The next statement, I'm their boss. There's nothing I can do. It's not my job to stop poor mental health. And this is false. And here's why. We spend 90,000 hours of our lives at work on average. Work is at the very core of contemporary life for most people. It doesn't matter if you're working in an office or you're I don't know, a seafarer who's like thousands of miles away from home, working in isolation or working on a ship somewhere. Essentially, you as an employer, you provide a lot of really good things for your people. So for example, like financial security, personal identity. How often do we introduce ourselves in conjunction with our careers, right? Like, like, hi, I'm Meg, I do this, or hi, I'm Joe, I work in sales in this company, for example. And it's you actively, as a business leader and employer, give them an opportunity to make a meaningful contribution to their workplace, which is highly valuable. So in theory, workplaces have great potential to boost people's mental health and wellness. It is ripe soil for this. And the World Health Organization and International Labor Organization basically chunked it into these 5 ingredients that you give your people that promotes mental well-being in the workplace. So these are things like time structure, social contact, a collective purpose, social identity, which I just mentioned, and regular activity, which means, having a way to organize your daily life, because that's also very important. And also during COVID, I noticed that a lot of my friends have been saying their days have sort of blurred together and there's no sort of start and stop in terms of their hours and work hours. So therefore, the workplace has great potential to optimize things like prevention and management of mental health issues. The next one is employees want employers' support when it comes to mental health in and out of work. And this is true. Next one, and the last one, is that half of millennials and 75% of Gen Zers had left roles in the past for mental health reasons, and this is true. So let's just do a very quick recap from our little game and see what have we learned so far. So now we understand that, right, mental health isn't just about feeling sad. It has a lot of different dimensions and a lot of different flavors to it, right? You have a spectrum of, feeling great and you're flourishing and you're thriving at work and in life. And then further down the other end of the extreme, which is, where you're feeling more, down in the dumps. That being said, I also want to stress that if you have previously been diagnosed with a mental health condition like bipolar disorder or depression, for example, that doesn't mean that you're stuck in that rut forever. You can have a mental health disorder, but also experience mental well-being. So it isn't as black and white. And by understanding that, you can actually bring more diversity into your workplace. And honestly, when people, I have been asked by people, oh, is there a way we can screen people for depression out, or people with, schizophrenia out of the workplace, for example? And I just want to stress that people who are able to bounce back demonstrate a great level of resilience, and they, have ways of understanding how to think and work creatively, and they bring a different flavor to your workforce. So for your business purposes, you don't actually want to do that. And I also want to stress that things like a little bit of stress and anxiety is actually good for work performance. So you don't actually want to eradicate all of that out of your workforce. But the problem now is that there's still a lot of stigma around this topic, right? The majority of employees don't feel 100% safe enough yet to talk very openly to their colleagues or the boss about this, because they're sort of concerned whether they're going to be discriminated against, or if a common one we often hear is if it's going to somehow hurt their career progression in some way. And the percentage of people I just mentioned in the true-false statement who are not functioning or feeling their best and are experiencing some level of psychological distress, they're still coming to work. You'd think that they're taking sick days, or they're sort of like a stock photo and they're laying in their beds with a grayscale background, but honestly, these people are still coming to work. and working at a much reduced capacity. And this phenomenon is called presenteeism, which is more common. And they're probably sitting at work, at your workplace right now. So knowing all of this, why bother? Simply, it's good for people and it's good for business. Investing in a proper mental health program, and I don't just mean, that one-off yoga class or sticking a crisis hotline in an employee handbook, is a competitive advantage to you as a business leader. There have been copious amounts of research done on the ROI of investing in a proper mental health program, with every dollar invested yielding a 4x return in improved health and productivity. And so these would include things like less sick leave, for example, lower medical claims, reduction in long and short-term disability related to mental health. And it's unsurprising that providing employees with the support they need improves not only engagement, but also it's very attractive for your business in terms of recruitment and retention. So it's not just, a nicer thing to do than nothing at all, but it actually has tangible benefits and returns for you. So if we had to dissect the anatomy of mental wellness at work, what does that look like exactly? And, I know that the Gen.T list is very, very diverse. We have some wonderful leaders, in all sorts of different industries. So I try to distill what are some of the transferable elements that works across the board. And these are the sort of three that I came up with, which is one is positive and safe culture. The second is mental health and wellness management. And lastly, supporting people with mental health disorders. So without further ado, let's launch into positive and safe culture. And I specifically pick this stock photo because it's not like a cheesy, everyone's holding hands or giving each other high fives, because it's just two guys, probably having a conversation over lunch. And it just feels a little more open and a little more natural. And this is sort of how we sort of envision what a positive and safe culture looks like. And just a slight segue, I have a wonderful friend who is an HR director at a shipping company. And I've actually gone out and met people randomly for the first time. And without any prompt from me at all, they've actually told me themselves that shipping company has a solid reputation. People love working there and people have stayed for a lot of their career at that shipping company. So, they must be doing something right. And so what is that secret sauce? And this HR director says and I just put it directly in his words, he makes sure that his people come into work with the absence of fear. And I love this because it's so simple and there's just no jargon behind it. And he was already thinking about psychological safety without actually having, that technical term attached to it. But put simply, it's basically creating a place where your people feel good about coming to work, and everyone feels encouraged and supported. So these would include things like a zero tolerance approach to discrimination. It encourages a diverse workforce and ensures everyone gets a fair go. So you can imagine when it comes to mental health and wellness, this means not penalizing someone for not feeling well, for example. And one small step, we know that when we create tiny habits, it's about making those really small steps that's easy for us to do than, revamping our whole organization's wellness program. So maybe one small step you can start with is just, asking people how they are before a meeting. Genuinely, don't don't brush over it. Don't say, oh, hi, how are you? How's your Saturday? And then not really listen to what they have to say and then just delving straight into the numbers. Or, if someone's work behavior is getting erratic, or maybe they're not showing up, just err on compassion. We like to say, because everyone has a backstory, and what you're seeing in front of you might not be the full picture. So just ensure people feel trusted and cared for at work, and incrementally reduce that stigma. The next thing I want to touch upon is mental health and wellness management. So research has shown that wellness programs are more likely to achieve positive returns of investment when they support employees along the entire spectrum of mental health. Remember, I said, it's not very black and white. It's sort of like a whole spectrum of different colors of what mental health looks like. So it could be from promotion of well-being generally to preventative interventions, and then at the more severe end of the spectrum, providing support like actual clinical support or clinical care. And research has also demonstrated that the majority of this is prioritizing a lot of that middle chunk, which is investing in higher impact areas like the preventative interventions and efforts. Basically, you don't wait until things get really, really bad, but you sort of stop them in their tracks, if you will. Or if people are already feeling, are doing well for themselves, making sure that we sustain that level of wellness for them. Also just saw that there was a poll that came up. We asked, does your company provide employees with information and tools to support and maintain their mental well-being at work and outside of work? And 91% said no, which is a good answer. It's an honest answer. And hopefully my next couple of points could help you also think about what to look for when we invest in these tools and information. Because the previous poll mentioned a good chunk of the attendees are saying not yet, but we're thinking about it. So without further ado, some things to look out for. I've called them the 3 Ps for you to keep in mind when you're thinking of implementing a mental health initiative. And that's promotive, preventative, and proactive. What do all of these mean? So let's start with promotive. This means doing things like, these are running the campaigns and to boost mental health awareness. Things like making sure people know where to find resources in their company, encouraging people to seek support, and that most importantly, it's okay to use these resources. Because if you invest in something, resources are only as good as they're being used, right? And people need to know, what they're there for and why they need, and when they need it. The next point is preventative. Now, there are always ways we can, as a workplace, make sure people don't boil over, right? Like managing workloads, making sure deadlines are realistic, having better communication channels and better communication skills with your team. But life doesn't work 9 to 5, right? And everyone's story is unique and different. So maybe you've got a guy called Timothy, who's your software developer, and his life could have started at 6 a.m. because they had to take care of a sick parent. And that's causing them a lot of emotional distress that they're bringing into work. And these effects are compounding and affecting their functionality of what is normally, your brilliant software developer that you hired. And as a company, you can actually support them with preventative tools. I don't have enough time to go through all of them, but something that has been quite effective and has been gaining quite a lot of traction is actually tech solutions, for several reasons. And for example, people can use it anywhere, anytime. Like I said, life doesn't work 9 to 5. So support should mirror that. Support should be the same. And especially now more than ever, I mean, there's more flexible work policies, you know, and remote working. If COVID-19 has shown us anything, it's that. And if you have a relatively large organization, for example, across different jurisdictions or across different offices, it would be beneficial to have something that scales across these geographies and offices. And another point is the act of having support is quite literally in your hands on your phone. And that is extremely powerful. It's very good design because it doesn't feel like you need to go out of your way or feel like, you know, you're different or that there's something inherently wrong that you need to identify yourself with to get that support. Support is quite literally as normal as using your phone. And the final point is proactive. So there's this trend now moving from reactive to proactive. And the status quo was to be reactive previously with mental health issues. So how I like to envision reactivity is sort of like a fire extinguisher. The fire has to have already happened and you're sort of just reacting to it and putting it out. So what that might look like could be Timothy, the software developer, not really handling the compounding effects of work and family stress, for example. And that puts him in a position of crisis because he was just, and this is a very Hong Kong mindset, and I'm sure it's the same across different cities in APAC as well, which is just to push through it. I'm just going to push through it and sort of just sweep this and sweep my mental health and wellness just under the rug. I can handle this just one more day, to a point where, you know, they're in crisis and things are sort of piling up and overwhelming. Then that gets managed by seeing, you know, potentially if he goes and seeks help, a clinical professional. So that's what a fire extinguisher solution might look like. So reactive approaches can successfully target individual needs on a case-by-case basis. And typically what that looks like what that tool looks like in a workplace is a hotline you speak to called the Employee Assistance Program. So it's a static hotline that you would have to dial a number and book an appointment and see a professional. But historically, we know that usage rates are very, very low. So clearly, we have to do something if there's a big gap between risk and need and the usage rate of current resources and the status quo. Proactive means doing something before the full-blown fire happens, right? It's like investing in a smoke detector and sprinkler system. And these approaches have the advantage of nipping some of the mental health issues in the bud, which reduces the risk and triggers for employees. Now let's have a look at supporting people with mental health disorders. Now, if someone was diagnosed with a mental health disorder, that does not mean they can't do their job or that they're unemployable. They're talented, they give it their best. That's why you hired them in the first place. It's also a more sustainable thing to do than to fire someone and to go through a hiring and retraining process all over again. It's actually more cost effective for you as an employer. So what I can say to that is help your people stay at or return to work if they've taken some time off. If they, if they're off due to mental health issues, one suggestion as a rule of thumb, I've seen a workplace implement is to treat it as if someone's been off due to a physical health issue. And just ask them how you can be of support, how they'd like to be supported, and make sure that they're included as part of that conversation. So now let's move on to, great, learned all of that, what do I do next? And one step that you can start off with is actually making that commitment. One way I've seen this being done is signing a public pledge. So previously I advised a corporate founded network on their mental health initiative. And this is something that they did, and they sort of came up with 5 best practices, which I can sort of share a little more in the next couple of points. And also to, just reevaluate, have a good look at your culture, make sure that your core values and your culture are aligned. Addressing this poll, we asked, has your company tracked the impact of workplace on employee mental well-being with data? And there's a resounding no. There's a 62% response to no, and then 36 to I don't know. Okay, the poll's ended, and it's no for sure now. And this is actually a very important step that you should be thinking about, which goes to my next point, to measure where your company's at, because taking a baseline measure of where your company is today helps you create an anchor of where your next steps forward and how. So in the words of W. Edward Deming, he says, "In God we trust, but all else must bring data." And I stick true to that. So the number one thing on the pledge, for example, was to be data-driven in a way that's safe, anonymized, and confidential. So you can measure your organization's current state of mental health and wellness, resource effectiveness, all the while making sure people feel comfortable and safe sharing that information. So like I mentioned, going forward, if you know where you are today, you have that anchor and reference point. So whatever you implement or whatever you do going forward, you're able to measure what's happening, so you can achieve that desired impact, or know where to improve adoption rates and enhance future decision-making skills, decision-making around your well-being strategy. So very quickly, one example, a case study at Neurum, for example, we found that it's not enough to say, your people are stressed at your workplace at this level. But it's actually more helpful to be more granular and say, look, it's because of financial health issues. And maybe your next workshop, it shouldn't be a generic, stress management, mindfulness workshop, but have you maybe thought around something that might cater to money matters, that would better relate to your workforce, and maybe more people would turn up and there are better engagement rates, for example. Then my final point is investing in management tools that work, right? So when I say this, I mean thinking about those 3 Ps that I mentioned, and finding tools that incorporate those elements. That's promotive, preventative, and proactive. So you really cover some good ground. So for example, the tools that you can invest in might raise awareness of various well-being topics to do with work or outside of work, or tools that address different dimensions of mental health, from, letting people keep or sustain their mental health and wellness to preventing people get worse or helping people manage a previously diagnosed mental health disorder or something more severe, for example. Or making sure your employees know where to get access and get signposted to the right support. I like to call this almost like a little GPS system for mental health help in your company. And a last point is maybe to do activities that promote and are beneficial to employee mental well-being, and making sure that you promote these proportionately to other wellness activities as well. So mental health and wellness is seen on par as physical health. So to wrap it up, I want to say that you hire the best minds, right? They want to show up for you, so show up for them by investing in their mental health and wellness in some of the ways we touched upon in this workshop. And so I really appreciate your attention. Here's my contact, and I will hand you guys back into Lee's safe hands.
Thank you very much, Megan. So much insight there. I think if I remember only one thing, it will be the 4x return on every dollar spent on mental wellness, but a lot of stuff. I was kind of frantically scribbling down notes in the middle of that. A lot of stuff for all of us to take away and to really action immediately in our workplaces as well. So thank you so much. I could abuse my position as moderator and ask you all the questions I want, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to open it up to the floor. And so if you do have a question, as a reminder, if you have a question for Megan, please use the raise hand function on Zoom. You'll see it at the bottom toolbar there. Raise your hand and then I'll call upon you and turn on your microphone and then ask you to ask your question directly to Megan. So I see a couple of hands up there. Anyone else want to put their hand up right now? Okay, so I see Sabrina Lee, who I'm going to unmute. Sabrina, what's your question for Megan?
Hi, Megan. My question is, how do we ensure the mental wellness program is optimally used by all our employees?
That's a wonderful question. I think that goes to the benefit of being able to measure it in the first place, which is oftentimes it's sort of things we invest money in. And we don't really know what the success metric of what that looks like and whether it's really made a dent in your workforce. So I would definitely say invest in something that measures and creates a baseline of where your workforce wellness is, and see if there are any changes over that. And you can sort of map that into when you introduce certain workshops or certain initiatives into your workforce.
Okay, great. Moving on, I see a couple of other hands raised. So I'm going to call on Samantha Top. Samantha is a colleague, actually, full disclosure, so doesn't need to indicate where she's from. Sam, what's your question for Megan?
Hi there. So I just wanted to ask a little bit about the best way that you can communicate to your employees, the purpose and the importance of a mental wellness program, especially, without sounding like you're only trying to look after their mental needs because it could benefit the company financially. Yeah,
absolutely. And I hope that that's not the only avenue of how we're going to go about it. But of course, it also something that also gets missed out in terms of conversations around mental health and wellness is it benefits people's quality of lives. So maybe just a quick story. We started out in a Chinese manufacturing company, which is not your rah-rah mental health sort of workplace you'll think of, right? And the sort of way we cracked it was not to talk about it in terms of, oh, it's going to make you feel better, but actually letting people know the sort of tangible outcomes if you invested in your mental health and wellness. So for example, if you for example, the benefits of mindfulness, just creating like a holding room in your mind before you say something, that the first reactive thing that comes to your mind. What are the benefits of that in your partnership, for example? And when you sort of talk about it in terms of employees' quality of life as a larger conversation, at least over here, I feel like that's an easier sell or an easier introduction to ease employees into discussing or buying into mental health initiatives. I hope that answers your question.
That mental hall where we think about things before we say them, I think we could all do with one of those. That's otherwise known as a filter in layman's speak, right?
Oh, absolutely. I hope it didn't sound like previous experience, because it absolutely was.
Yeah. For me, I could certainly use with one of those holes. So I think we have time for a couple more questions. So a reminder for anybody who didn't catch me earlier, if you have a question for Megan, just hit the raise hand function, and I can see it when you raise your hand, and then I'll call on you to orally ask your question directly to Megan, and doesn't need to go through my filter, which might pollute it somewhat with my own biases. Christine Chan, I'm turning on your mic. Christine, what's your question for Megan?
Hi, I'm Christine. Thanks for Megan's sharing. So I got a question. What goes into creating a safe space for the employees to openly share their issues with the company? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and I'll actually leverage the experience from other HR directors and their sharings with me. One of them is actually not forcing them to. It's actually to just let them know that it's okay to do that, and that if and when they do, that they won't be penalized for it, that it's welcomed and it's safe and it's okay to. One of the ways that you can do that in a more indirect way is actually investing in building a mental health initiative. Some other ways is actually more top down. We see CEOs, for example, sharing their own mental health stories, or like the corporate pledge, for example. So employees know that even if they're not ready now to open up and share about it, that they are working in an environment that when and if they're ready, that it won't be sort of reacted to in a very negative way.
Okay, I think we have time for one or maybe two questions if they're really, really quick. This is your last chance, everyone on the webinar, to raise your hand. So do click raise hand if you want to ask your question, and I will pick from you. I'm going to move over to Juliana Lowe and turn on microphone. Juliana, what's your question for Megan?
Hi.
Hi, Megan. This is Juliana. Just wanted to see who from my team should be involved in crafting this program, and is it necessary to get an external professional to advise us on building a mental wellness program?
Yeah, absolutely. There are several ways. Typically, there might be like a well-being team. If not, you usually see HR taking the reins on this. There are also situations where I've seen it being more organic, like an internal mental health champion. That's not HR. That's not part of a well-being team, but just someone who this really speaks to championing internal mental health initiatives. I do recommend actually seeking external help or external counsel to actually put these sort of systems in place for you, just because the resources are out there, and it is going to be a more painless process and more end-to-end for your workplace. That's one of the things we do at Neurum, is make sure that we can help you measure and manage sort of mental health and wellness in your workplace, and help you do things like campaigns, for example. So yeah, there are lots of resources out there, and I'm sure if you can, definitely reach out to some of these resources and people out there already doing these things to make your life easier.
Wise words. I think one of the things that I've learned is that we can all be doing more. than we already are. Thank you very much, Megan. So that's it for this edition of Cloud Talk, which is a weekly virtual series from Gen.T where we discuss blue sky ideas that matter. It is bi-weekly in both Chinese and English. The next English edition will be on May 5th at a similar time to right now. It will be a virtual roundtable with environmentalist, activist, and filmmaker Craig Leeson, who is the director behind A Plastic Ocean and a forthcoming film called The Last Glacier. We will be having a virtual roundtable with Gen.T honorees who are really leading the charge in the sustainability space. We'll be asking questions to Craig, and it'll be available to everyone to watch as well. For more information on that and all of our future Cloud Talks, please do visit GenerationT.Asia or check us out on Instagram at GenerationT_Asia. If you have found this session useful, then please, as a token of your appreciation, do donate to the Joyful Mental Health Foundation. This is a charity nominated by Megan herself for the amazing work that they do. So if you've taken a lot of actionable insights today, we'd really appreciate it, for a token of appreciation, if you would consider donating to Joyful Mental Health Foundation as well. So finally, thank you, Megan, very, very much for all of your insight this afternoon.
Thank you so much.
And thank you, everybody, for joining us on Zoom. We'll see you again next week. Thank you.